You know that feeling when you walk into a room and your dog looks at you differently? Not the usual excited tail wagging, but this weird pause, this moment of hesitation, like they're trying to figure out if you're really you. Or when your cat, who normally couldn't care less about your existence, suddenly won't leave you alone, staring at you with those unblinking eyes like they can see something you can't. You tell yourself you're imagining it, that animals don't work that way, that you're just being paranoid. But deep down, you know something shifted. Your own pet is looking at you like you're a stranger wearing your clothes. And the terrifying part isn't that they notice. The terrifying part is that you don't know what they're noticing. What changed in you that even creatures who live by instinct alone can sense? What escaped from you without your permission? If you've ever felt like your own body betrayed you in ways you can't name or control, if you've ever wondered why everything around you seems to respond to a version of yourself you didn't consciously create, then what I'm about to show you will completely reframe how you understand the relationship between who you think you are and what you actually project into the world. There's something deeply unsettling about realizing that your body communicates without your consent. We spend our entire lives believing we're in control of the signals we send, carefully managing our words, our facial expressions, our tone of voice. We learn early on that survival in the social world depends on this control, on presenting the right version of ourselves to the right people at the right time. We become masters of the mask, experts in the performance. But then something happens that shatters this illusion completely. The animals around you, creatures who don't understand your carefully crafted social performance, who don't care about your resume or your reputation or your carefully chosen words, they start responding to you differently. Your dog becomes anxious when you enter the room. Your cat follows you obsessively. Even the birds outside seem to react to your presence in ways they never did before, and you realize, with a creeping horror, that your body has been speaking a language you never learned to control, broadcasting signals you never intended to send. The usual response to this realization is to double down on control. You try to be more mindful, more present, more intentional with every gesture and movement. You monitor yourself constantly, watching for any sign that you're slipping, that the uncontrolled thing is emerging again. But the more you try to contain it, the stronger it becomes. The animals sense your tension and respond with their own unease. You're caught in a feedback loop where your attempt to control the uncontrollable only makes it more obvious, more present, more impossible to hide. What Michel Foucault understood, and what most of us spend our entire lives refusing to see, is that the body is never really ours to control in the way we imagine. We think of ourselves as drivers in a vehicle, sitting in the command center of consciousness, directing this meat machine according to our will and intention. But Foucault showed us something far more disturbing and far more liberating. The body is not a possession we control, but a site where countless forces intersect, where power relations materialize, where social training and biological impulse and unconscious pattern all collide and create something that exceeds our conscious direction. When you try to manage your presentation, when you attempt to discipline your gestures and expressions into acceptable forms, you're not actually controlling your body. You're enacting a specific technology of power that has been inscribed into your flesh through years of social conditioning. And here's what makes this so profound. That inscribed control, that learned discipline, it creates its own form of tension, its own energetic signature. Animals who haven't been trained to ignore these deeper somatic signals, who haven't learned to privilege verbal communication over embodied truth, they read this tension immediately. They're not reacting to your conscious intentions. They're reacting to the war being waged between your disciplined surface and your uncontrolled depths. Think about what actually happens in your body when you try to control yourself. Your muscles tighten in specific patterns. Your breathing becomes shallow and restricted. Your nervous system shifts into a state of hypervigilance, constantly monitoring for signs of failure or slippage. This isn't a neutral state of calm control. This is a state of internal warfare, where one part of you attempts to dominate and suppress other parts. And this warfare has a smell, a frequency, an energetic quality that radiates from you whether you intend it to or not. The dog who looks at you strangely isn't confused about who you are. The dog is confused about why you're at war with yourself. The cat who won't Leave you alone isn't suddenly clingy. The cat is responding to the vulnerability that emerges when your defenses are exhausted, when the controlled facade starts to crack. What Foucault called biopower, this form of power that operates through the management and optimization of life itself, it doesn't just exist in hospitals and prisons and schools. It exists in your own relationship with your own flesh. Every time you force a smile when you're dying inside, every time you straighten your posture to appear more confident, every time you modulate your voice to sound more professional or more friendly or more whatever it is you think you should be, you're exercising a form of power over yourself that was trained into you by years of social discipline. And the tragedy is that we experience this internal domination as self-improvement, as growth, as becoming more civilized or more mature. But the body knows better. The body remembers what it felt like before you learned to police every gesture, before you internalized the surveillance cameras of social judgment. And when that deeper bodily knowledge starts to emerge, when the repressed vitality begins to leak through the cracks in your controlled presentation, the animals notice immediately because they never lost touch with that level of reality in the first place. This is where Foucault's concept of resistance becomes crucial, because resistance isn't something that comes from outside power. Resistance is what emerges when the living body refuses to be completely captured by the disciplinary mechanisms that attempt to organize it. Your dog's strange behavior isn't a judgment of you. It's a recognition of this resistance, this life force in you that exceeds your attempts to contain it. Think about someone going through a major life transition, someone whose carefully constructed identity is falling apart. Maybe they just lost a job that defined them, or ended a relationship that gave them structure, or received a diagnosis that changed everything they thought they knew about their future. On the surface, they might be holding it together. They show up to work, they smile at the right times, they say all the appropriate things. But watch how animals respond to them. The family dog becomes protective, positioning itself between this person and the door. The cat, who usually ignores everyone, suddenly wants to sit on their lap constantly. Even wild animals, birds and squirrels, seem to behave differently around them, either approaching more boldly or fleeing more quickly. What's happening here isn't mysterious or supernatural. What's happening is that the enormous effort required to maintain the performance of normalcy, when your entire world is collapsing, creates a specific somatic signature. Your cortisol levels are elevated, your muscle tension is distributed in unusual patterns, your breathing and heart rate variability have changed. All of this alters your scent, your energetic presence, the subtle cues that you emit without conscious awareness. And animals who navigate the world primarily through these non-verbal channels, they immediately register the change. Before we go deeper into this, I need to pause and ask you something really important, and I want you to be completely honest, even if it's just with yourself. Have you noticed this? Have you experienced moments where the animals around you responded to you in ways that made you question what they were sensing? Because I know that when something like this happens, it can feel absolutely crazy. You look around and everyone else seems normal. Everyone else's pets behave predictably, and you start to wonder if you're losing your mind, if you're reading too much into random animal behavior. You might even feel embarrassed to admit it, like it's such a small thing, such a weird thing to be affected by. But the truth is, you're not alone in noticing this. Thousands of people watching this video right now have had the exact same experience. They've felt their cat staring at them with inexplicable intensity. They've noticed their dog acting anxious or protective for no apparent reason. And what helps more than any theory or explanation is knowing that other people have witnessed this too, that you're not imagining it, that it means something real. So scroll down to the comments and write this. Animals respond to me differently now. You don't need to explain everything if you don't want to. Just that one sentence is enough, because when you write it, you're not just sharing an observation. You're telling someone else who will read your comment that they're not crazy either, that this thing that seems so strange and isolating is actually a common human experience. And that might be exactly what someone needed to hear today. Now here's where this gets really interesting. where Foucault's insights about the body and power open up a completely different way of understanding what's happening. We've been trained to think of our conscious intentions as the primary driver of our behavior, and everything else as either support system or malfunction. The body is supposed to obey the mind. Emotions are supposed to be managed by reason. The unconscious is supposed to be subordinated to conscious will. This entire hierarchy is built into the way we talk about ourselves, the way we diagnose problems, the way we pursue improvement. We say things like, I need to get my body under control, or I can't let my emotions rule me, or I have to be more mindful and present. All of this language assumes that there's a sovereign self, a central command that should be directing the show. But what if that entire model is backwards? What if the body isn't a servant that sometimes rebels, but a complex ecological system that your conscious mind barely understands? What if the so-called breakdown of control, the moment when your carefully managed presentation starts to fail, isn't a malfunction at all, but the emergence of a deeper intelligence, a bodily knowing that refuses to be silenced anymore? Foucault talked about subjugated knowledges, forms of understanding that have been disqualified, dismissed, or buried by dominant systems of power. And the body holds subjugated knowledges that your conscious, rational mind has spent years trying to suppress. It knows when you're in danger, even when your thoughts tell you everything is fine. It knows when a relationship is toxic, even when you've rationalized all the reasons to stay. It knows when you're living a lie, even when you've convinced yourself you're happy. When animals start responding to you differently, they're not reacting to a breakdown. They're reacting to a breakthrough. They're sensing the emergence of these subjugated bodily knowledges, the parts of you that can no longer be contained by your disciplined social performance. And their response isn't necessarily about whether this is good or bad. Animals don't moralize. They simply register authenticity. They register coherence or incoherence between your surface presentation and your deeper somatic reality. A dog becomes anxious around someone whose body is screaming danger, even while their words say everything is fine, not because the dog judges them, but because the dog feels the incoherence and doesn't know how to respond to it. A cat becomes clingy with someone whose defended facade is cracking, not because the cat pities them, but because the cat is drawn to the vulnerability and realness that emerges when the mask falls away. What we call losing control is often the body's way of reasserting its own wisdom against the tyranny of social conditioning. And the reason this feels so terrifying is that we've been taught our entire lives that safety depends on control, that letting go means disaster, that the unregulated body will betray us or humiliate us or destroy everything we've built. But here's the thing Foucault kept trying to show us. The control was never really ours to begin with. What we experience as self-control is actually the internalization of external disciplinary mechanisms. It's the panopticon you built inside your own skull, the surveillance camera you turned on yourself so effectively that you forgot it was ever imposed from outside. And when that internal surveillance starts to fail, when the body refuses to be monitored and managed so completely, what you're experiencing isn't a loss of your own power, but the failure of power structures that were never serving you in the first place. Let me tell you about something I encountered in the research for this video, a woman who went through exactly this kind of transformation. She had spent her entire adult life being what everyone needed her to be, the perfect daughter, the supportive wife, the dedicated employee, the selfless friend. She had mastered the art of reading rooms, of adjusting her energy to make others comfortable, of never being too much or too little of anything. And then she got sick. Not dramatically sick, not in a way that gave her permission to stop, but chronically, mysteriously sick, in a way that doctors couldn't quite diagnose or fix. She kept going, kept performing, kept maintaining all the roles and responsibilities, but something in her body was refusing, and the first sign that something had fundamentally shifted came from her dog. This animal, who had always been calm and obedient, suddenly wouldn't leave her side, would position itself between her and other people, would whine and pace when she tried to push through her exhaustion to do one more thing. At first she thought the dog was sick too, took it to the vet, got it checked out, everything was fine. Then she thought maybe she smelled different because of whatever was wrong with her, but it wasn't about smell in the way we usually think about it. What had changed was that her body was no longer fully cooperating with her conscious intentions. When she forced a smile, her muscles tensed in ways they never had before. When she said yes to things she wanted to refuse, her breathing became shallow and strained. When she performed enthusiasm she didn't feel, her entire nervous system went into a state of alert. And the dog, who had always been attuned to her but never responded so dramatically, was now picking up on the growing divergence between who she was pretending to be and what her body was actually experiencing. The dog wasn't worried about her illness. The dog was worried about the war she was waging against herself. And that worry, that animal concern, was what finally made her stop and pay attention to what her body had been trying to tell her for months or maybe years. If you've made it this far in this video, I know you're not just looking for information. You're looking for a way to make sense of something that feels both deeply personal and completely inexplicable. And I want you to know that you don't have to figure this out alone. This channel exists for people like you, people who are experiencing shifts and changes that don't fit into neat categories, people who need frameworks that respect the complexity of what's actually happening in your body and your life. Every week I explore these kinds of questions, bringing together philosophy and lived experience to make sense of transformations that our culture doesn't have good language for. If you want to continue this journey of understanding what your body knows that your mind hasn't caught up to yet, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Not because I need the numbers, but because you deserve to have resources that take your experience seriously, that don't try to reduce everything to simple explanations or quick fixes. And if this video resonated with something true in you, if it gave words to an experience you thought was yours alone, leave a like so that other people who are going through their own version of this can find their way here. You're not alone in this. What Foucault called practices of freedom weren't about escaping the body or transcending it or finally getting it under perfect conscious control. Practices of freedom were about developing a different relationship with yourself, one that doesn't require constant warfare between different parts of you. When you stop trying to dominate your body into submission, when you stop treating every uncontrolled gesture or unexpected response as a failure that needs to be corrected, something remarkable starts to happen. The tension that animals were responding to begins to dissolve, not because you've achieved some new level of control, but because you've stopped fighting. The dog relaxes because you're no longer at war with yourself. The cat loses interest because you're no longer leaking the vulnerability that comes from exhaustion. You don't become some perfectly authentic version of yourself. That's another fantasy of control, just in different clothing. What you become is more coherent, more integrated, more at ease with the fact that you contain multitudes, that some of what moves through you will never be fully captured by conscious intention, and that this isn't a problem to be solved, but a reality to be accepted. The animals were never judging you. They were simply responding to the truth that your body was telling, even when your words were lying. And when you stop lying, when you stop forcing the performance, when you let your body speak its own language without constant editorial intervention, the animals stop responding strangely because there's nothing strange happening anymore. There's just you, in all your complicated and uncontrolled and absolutely real humanity. This is the gift that animals offer us if we're willing to receive it. They show us when we're out of alignment with ourselves, when the gap between our performance and our reality has become too wide to maintain. They don't do this to shame us or to expose our failures. They do this because they live in a world of direct somatic communication, where bodies speak to bodies without the mediation of language or social pretense. And when we learn to read their responses, not as judgments, but as information, we get access to truths about ourselves that our conscious mind works very hard to avoid. Your dog's anxiety isn't telling you that you're broken. It's telling you that you're trying to hold something together that wants to come apart. Your cat's unusual attention isn't saying that you're weak. It's saying that something real and vulnerable is finally becoming visible through the cracks in your armor. The body that escaped control isn't a body that failed. It's a body that refused to be completely colonized by the disciplinary mechanisms that tried to organize it according to someone else's logic. And the freedom that Foucault kept pointing toward wasn't freedom from the body, but freedom to let the body be what it is, to let it speak its truths, to let it resist when resistance is necessary, to let it rest when rest is required, to let it exist as something more than an instrument for your conscious intentions. So the next time an animal looks at you, strangely, don't rush to fix whatever they're sensing. Pause. Get curious. Ask yourself what your body might be trying to communicate that you've been refusing to hear. Ask yourself what performance you're maintaining that requires so much energy that even the animals can feel the strain. Ask yourself what might happen if you stop trying to control the uncontrollable and instead learn to work with it, to listen to it, to respect it as a form of intelligence that exists whether you authorize it or not. The body never belonged to you in the way you were taught to believe. It was never supposed to be a servant that obeys your every command. It's something much stranger and much more powerful than that. It's a living system that contains wisdoms you haven't learned, that remembers things you've tried to forget, that knows truths you've spent years denying. And when it escapes control, when it refuses to be managed anymore, it's not staging a rebellion against you. It's trying to save you from a war you were never meant to win. The animals see this. They always have. Maybe it's time we learn to see it too.